the previous videos, I presented undeniable evidence of life after death and explained where we go after it. I also clarified what dreams really are and revealed the tragic consequences that suicides face after their death. I shared the first of many NDE stories I have gathered over more than 20 years of researching the phenomenon of death and life beyond the material body. If you haven't watched them yet, I encourage you to click on the name of my channel and the Videos tab, where you will find all the videos I have created so far. In this episode, I will present another NDE story from my collection. This will be the account of a woman who experienced clinical death as a result of a car accident. Her beloved dog was with her in the incident.
The story took place in 2015. It was a cloudy, rainy autumn morning. I had just dropped off my 5-year-old daughter at kindergarten and was returning home with my dog. He loved riding in the car, so I would take him with me whenever possible. I was starting work in an hour and a half, so there was still plenty of time to take him for a walk. We lived in the suburbs, and not far from our house was a small forest. There was a winding path through it that we loved to walk on. Max was a medium-sized mixed-breed dog, similar to a Labrador. He was almost entirely black, with a white patch on his chest. He had been picked up off the street at around 3 years old, and 6 months later, we adopted him from a shelter. We had to put in some effort to train him, as the years spent on the street had clearly influenced his behavior. He would growl whenever someone approached his food bowl, and he was very distrustful. But within about a year, we managed to convince him that we meant him no harm, and that nothing bad would come from our hands. My husband, our 2 children, and I adored him. He became a true member of our family. When we walked in the woods with the kids, or when they played on the playground, Max would stay close to them, keeping a watchful eye to ensure they were safe. When my husband and I went to work, and we dropped the kids off at kindergarten and school, Max would stay home alone. On warm, sunny days, he would run around the yard, and on cooler days, we would leave him inside. We are opposed to kennels and cages, so Max lived with us. Whenever we returned home from work, he would be as happy as if he hadn't seen us for 10 years. He would jump on us, wagging his tail, and then lie on his back, waiting to be petted on his belly. He was a wonderful dog. That day, after dropping my daughter off at kindergarten, Max stayed in the car and moved to the front passenger seat. He loved sitting there because it gave him a much better view. When I returned to the car, he was sitting happily, tongue out and tail wagging. He couldn't wait for the ride. I petted his head and we started driving. The rain had stopped, so we could safely go for our walk in the woods. Just a few kilometers from our house, there is a fairly sharp turn. The road was very wet. I tried to drive carefully, so I was going quite slowly. However, the driver coming from the opposite direction was driving much too fast. I saw him lose control of the car and swerve into my lane at high speed. I had no way to avoid him. I screamed, and suddenly everything went dark. I started flailing my arms in panic. That's when I realized I had no ground under my feet. I tried to stand, but it was impossible. I felt like I was floating. Suddenly the image started to come back. When it became clear, I recognized that turn. I also recognized my car, which had apparently bounced off the other car, veered off the road, and was lying upside down. In the other car, I saw the airbags deployed and the driver opening the door and stumbling out. He sat down on the road, looking around with a dazed expression. When I looked inside my car, I was terrified. Our airbags had deployed too, but there was still a lot of blood on them. Max and I were lying there motionless. Blood covered my face. I started crying and panicking, but after a moment it hit me that I was dead. I calmed down a bit and began to wonder what would happen to me now. And then I saw a bright white light appear above the accident scene. It was some kind of tunnel. I felt that it radiated peace and love. And then I saw Max running into it. I called out, "Max, wait!" But he kept running. I called out a few more times, but he didn't listen to me and kept going. I wanted to run after him, but I was floating in the air. For a moment I couldn't move because I didn't know how to fly. But somehow, driven by the intention to catch up with Max, I started flying after him. I flew and called out to him, but he kept running. The circle of light grew larger and larger. Finally, I felt myself entering a kind of luminous mist. Max disappeared from my sight, so I got a bit scared and started calling out to him even louder. A moment later, I emerged from the mist and saw that I was in some sort of clouds. Golden rays of light shone through them. I stopped and began to look around. It was truly beautiful here. I felt such bliss. I felt an immense peace. I started flying among those clouds. I still felt like I had a body, but it was different now. My hands could dissolve and become mist. But whenever I wanted, they became hands again. Then suddenly I felt Max's presence. I was deeply moved and began calling out to him. And then I heard, "I'm here." It wasn't like a voice, but more like a thought that I received. I looked around and saw him. I was even more moved and immediately flew to him. I grabbed him tightly and hugged him. But it wasn't like hugging him when we were alive. I didn't feel our bodies as clearly. It was more like our spiritual bodies were touching. I felt immense bliss. It was like an exchange of love energy. And then I received his thought again. "Thank you for everything. Because of you, I can move on." I always knew that Max tried to communicate with us in his own doggy way. But now I could clearly and directly receive his thoughts. I looked at him and called out, "Where?" He looked at me as he usually did with his tongue out and tail wagging. He responded by sending a thought. When I was wandering the streets, I led an animal's life. I was ruled by instincts. But thanks to you taking me in, I started to change and become more like you. You loved me and treated me like a family member. Because of that, I can leave behind my animal incarnations, enter the next stage, and in my next life, I will be reincarnated as a human. I will always love you for that. When he said this, he started glowing with a bright golden light, and after a moment, he disappeared. "Wait," I called out. "What about me?" And then an unfamiliar voice spoke. "You must return to your husband and children." That's when I remembered them, and I felt very sad that they weren't with me. It was truly beautiful here, and I felt wonderful. But the longing for the rest of my family took over. The next thing I remember is waking up in the hospital. They miraculously saved me. When I finally recovered, we took the kids and went for a walk in our woods. At one point, the kids started crying and saying they missed Max. That's when I told them what had happened to me on the other side. It calmed them down a bit and gave them hope that they would meet him again someday. My husband was convinced that I made up the story on the spot just to comfort them. I tried to talk to him about it a few times, but he's very grounded and doesn't allow himself to believe in the afterlife and a talking Max who plans to become a human. But I know it really happened. I also know that we help Max a lot, which is why I now see life differently. Now I know how much good and helping others matter, and not just for people.
This was a very moving story, especially since I am a huge animal lover myself. I've always been hurt by the words of those who claim that animals don't have souls. When I asked them how they could be so sure, I would usually receive some pseudoscientific, unsubstantiated theories or assertions based on religious dogma. The truth, however, is that consciousness can take on different forms in the material subworlds. Sometimes it takes the form of a human, sometimes a dog, and sometimes a plant. It all depends on the level of development of that consciousness and the lives it has lived. A person who behaved primitively, aggressively, almost animalistically throughout their life may, after death, reincarnate into the body of an animal they resembled. But it also works the other way around, as shown in this NDE story. A dog that lived with humans, was loved by them, and was treated as a family member, eventually evolved to the point where it could reincarnate into a human body. But is an endless cycle of reincarnation really our destiny and the only form of existence? The answer to this question can be found in my publication. The link to purchase the book is in the description below the video. That's all for today. Thank you for your time and see you next time.